I want to congratulate you on Ripley. What an incredible show and performance.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. Well, I want to begin. Ripley is a pretty famous queer character who has had many iterations, including in the novels and, of course, the Anthony Minghella film, Purple Noon, and My American Friend. Would you talk about your approach to this character, given also that there's this thing of the menace in Highsmith's novels
Mm.
that you incorporate really well into your performance?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I do. I was. It was a big question that I have in relation to Tom and how you
Mm,
approach his not just his sexuality, but loads of aspects of his biography, his
yeah.
age, his nationality, his upbringing. So many questions that we have about him, and one of the things that I really strongly feel is that he people have enormous questions about him. They want to define him. They want to know,
Mm,
and
right.
I think those questions are sometimes. Uh, I think it's better not to overly diagnose him with anything, really. So in that sense, I
Mm.
do think he's a queer character in the sense that I think he's very other.
Right, right,
I
right.
think he's very other, and I think he's very othered. I think he's not given an opportunity to
Mm,
be himself in the sense that he's not exposed to so many beautiful things like the way some of the other characters are. Um,
mm,
I think he's a con artist, but he's an artist nevertheless, and we see
mm,
so much of him, particularly in this version of it, of him on his own. But I don't
yeah.
necessarily think he's a lonely character, but he's certainly a solitary character. And there's a kind of blankness to the character that I think was the biggest challenge for me to, first of all, recognize in order to be able to play him. Because
Mm,
so many of us, whatever our sexuality, can feel that we don't have access to certain parts of ourselves. And I think that's why we root for this character because we recognize him. And I think to other him and go, oh my God, he's a psycho or he's a thing. For me, all those words like sociopath and killer and villain, all those kind of things, are quite
yeah.
othering. And so when your first port of call as an actor is to not judge the character. So do I think
Mm,
that
mhm.
if you gave Tom a boyfriend or a girlfriend that everything would be okay? No, I don't. I don't think he would feel comfortable in
Yeah.
a gay bar any more than he would in a straight bar. He's a solitary figure, but I do think there's an enormous love that he has for Dickie,
Yeah.
and it's hard for him to um, express exactly what the nature of that love might be, particularly given the atmosphere and the laws of the time. And what he
Hmm.
does, notably in the story, is he uses uh, the situation of the law and the murkiness and the silence, the conspiracy of silence around same-sex relationships for his own
Yeah.
gain. So when
Hmm.
people say he infers things about relationships between two people of the same sex in order to divert attention away from him. So he's certainly aware of the prejudice and the law that exists in society, and he decides, just in order to survive, to take advantage of that. So it's very fascinating. All that stuff is very fascinating to me, and it's like holding water. And I think there's an awful lot of people who who can identify like that, and there are people who are asexual that feel that they aren't seen in that sense, and that's a perfectly legitimate and acceptable way to live your life. In the same way, any other form of sexuality within the legal within the legality is allowed to be.
Right, right. Well, I think that you are so obviously you've studied this, but I mean so insightful in all that you just said. And I should have been more clear. I think he's queer coded
Right.
in a
Yeah. Yeah.
way
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that
Yeah.
Mrs. Danvers or Bruno from Strangers on a Train is.
Yes.
I
Right.
I think that this series brings that out more than any iteration I've ever seen, and it actually imbues me to feel for him in a way that I never have before because Dickie is quite anti,
Yeah.
fairies,
Yes.
anti-queer.
Yeah.
Would you touch on that aspect of it?
Well, it's extraordinary, the cruelty, the sort of throwaway cruelty that a lot of queer and queer coded people, and not just queer coded people, but a lot of cruelty that was allowed to be just thrown around, prejudice, and these words that people
Yeah.
use that we think has absolutely no effect on people. Actually, if you continue to do that, a rage starts to
Mhm.
to to grow, and there's an anger within a lot of people, and a justified anger in many reasons for many people. And I'm not, of course, saying that people should be then afforded to go around and murder other people, but um, there's so much about this Ripley character that I feel I feel like he's a solitary character, and we see so much of him on his own in this version. And he's brilliant at what he does. He's called the talented Mr. Ripley. He's a con artist, and we see the beauty and the elan with which he can perform his work. But he lives in a rat-filled street, and nobody passes any comment on him. Nobody is interested in him. He lives in a boarding house in a tiny room, and then he's submerged into this world where people have absolutely no problem calling themselves artists without any talent, and they're afforded so many things, and I think the juxtaposition of those two worlds for Tom, combined with these kind of murky feelings that start to emerge, means that something ferocious emerges from him, and that's not because he's a natural born killer or bloodthirsty. It's because that exists within all of us, a rage. Whether it goes to the extreme that Tom Ripley exhibits is another story. But of course, that will happen if injustice prevails.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for
Thank you
speaking
for
with
your
me about
time.
this project, and congratulations.